The large brownstone apartment building I used to live in was mostly empty. The only other tenants were a nice, elderly lady on the first floor named Doris, and a young couple who lived across the hall from me on the second floor. Coincidentally, their apartment was directly above Doris's. I didn't mind the young couple, but I found them to be a bit antisocial. They pretty much kept to themselves, barely acknowledging me when I passed them in the hall or ran into them in the laundry room. Every now and then, the young man would give a head nod, but even that was a rarity. The thing that did bother me about them was the constant arguing that I frequently hear coming from their apartment. Shouts and cries would echo through the buildings over the winter months as the blanket of snow fell over the city. The young couple's arguments began to get worse. Often I found myself lying in bed, covering my ears in an attempt to drown out the sound of the man's voice as he viciously berated at his young lover. Even the quieter evenings were not without the occasional boom of a fist colliding with a wall or the crash of shattering glass. It was the day after one of those particularly nasty arguments that I noticed a black eye on the young woman as I passed her in the hall. When I asked her if her boyfriend had hit her, she broke down in my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I took her into my apartment to ask some follow-up questions and make her some hot tea, but once inside, I barely had time to boil some water before she threw herself at me and gave me the most passionate kiss of my entire life. We made love right there, on my kitchen table. Even with her swollen eye, I still found her beautiful. We held each other for what felt like an eternity before the banging started on my door. He was her boyfriend, and he didn't sound pleased. I told him to get lost, or I would call the cops and report him, which was something I planned on doing anyway. Eventually, after an hour-long standoff, he gave up and retreated back to his apartment. I never even asked the young woman her name. We just lied in bed, laughing and talking in each other's arms before falling asleep. And when I woke up in the morning, she was gone. Of course, I was upset. I had developed strong feelings for her, but I was more concerned for her safety than anything else. I had no idea what her boyfriend would do to her if she went back and told him about what happened between us. I slipped into some jeans, ran across the hall, and started knocking on their door to check on her. My knocks were met with only silence. I put my ear to the door in hopes that I could hear voices, a television, anything. But there was no noise. Later that day, I stopped by Doris's on my way out of the building, and I asked her if she had heard anything going on in the apartment above her earlier that morning. She looked at me like I was crazy when I mentioned the couple and how I genuinely worried for the young woman. Doris mockingly placed the back of her hand to my forehead as if she was checking for a fever. She went on to inform me that no one lived above her, and we were the only two tenants in the building. I called the landlord and told him about the young couple, but he insisted that the apartment had never been rented. Just in case, he decided to come down later that day and open it up in order to make sure that the couple that I described weren't squatters. He arrived at the building at around 3 in the afternoon. I pointed out the apartment to him that the young couple lived in. But when he opened the door, the place looked like it hadn't been inhabited in years. There was no furniture. A thick layer of dust coated the floor. The landlord gave me an irritated look and asked me why I was wasting his time, but all I could do was stand in the barren room, wide-eyed and slack-jawed. If you think this story ends with the couple disappearing, never to be heard from again, then you're wrong. Later that evening, a loud commotion rumbled from the mysterious apartment. The sound of the young woman's wails tore through the air like a buzzsaw. Even from behind the door, I could hear her boyfriend's palms as it struck the soft cheek that I had been kissing just the night before. I tried to force my way in, but the heavy oak door wouldn't budge when I rammed my shoulder into it. I called the police, but the ruckus subsided before they arrived. Needless to say, they weren't too pleased once they finally got the door open, only to find that the unit was unoccupied. However, as the months rolled along and the snow melted away, the arguments continued on. Doris never heard the screams and shouts above her, even though the fights had gotten louder and were carrying on longer than ever. I called the police a couple more times. Each visit they found the apartment completely empty. I eventually stopped when they started threatening to take legal action, but the fights did not. Every once in a while, I would see the young woman in the hall, always looking down to avoid eye contact with me as she passed. Not once would she answer my questions when I tried to speak to her. Even more disturbing was the state her face had become, more battered and bruised each time that I saw her. After a while, both eyes had become swollen shut and puffy like a prizefighter's immediately after a hard-fought bout. Black and purple bruises covered almost every inch of her skin, and she wore the outlines of her boyfriend's fingers around her throat like a necklace. The bridge of the young woman's once straight nose had become crooked and zigzagged off in multiple directions. Her boyfriend, on the other hand, just stared at me with the most disdainful eyes every time that I'd see him. He too would remain silent when I tried to ask him questions or threatened to have him arrested. I wanted to hit him, but unprovoked violence is against my ethic code. Besides, had I struck him, he would surely take his anger out on her. On top of it all, I was beginning to doubt my sanity. I could hear the couple, see the couple. I even felt the young woman's touch. But every time I demanded to be let into their apartment, either by the police or the landlord, it was just as empty and dusty as the first time that I had seen it. Still, the fighting in the apartment across the hall never ceased. I finally decided that the environment was too toxic for me to deal with, so I decided to move to a newer, more modern building on the east side. I hoped to put the awful experience from the Brownstone behind me, but unfortunately, this was not the case. Not a day passes where I don't catch a glimpse of them. I see the couple when I get off the elevator, exit my car to the parking lot, or walk alone down the hall at night. Her face is more twisted and contorted than ever, so smashed and swollen that it could not even pass for a human anymore. Her head dangles haphazardly off to the side, as if the neck was no longer capable of supporting its weight. Pus oozes from the open sores on the woman's arms, legs, and face. White-yellow bile dribbles from her mouth down the front of her chest. Scar tissue has formed over half of her scalp where her beautiful golden hair used to be. And perhaps worst of all, those supple lips that once felt so soft and comforting as they pressed against mine appear to have been torn clean off her face, exposing a set of jagged teeth jutting out from her bleeding, swollen gums. And her boyfriend just stares at me through those hateful eyes as the two of them follow me down the hallway and all the way to my apartment door.